To speak of the ether is to whisper into the very lungs of the cosmos, acknowledging a breath that was drawn long before the first stars ignited and will continue to circulate long after the last galaxy fades into a silent, frozen amber. We stand today upon a precipice of understanding, looking out over an ocean of unseen potential that the ancients once navigated with the grace of master mariners. This is not merely a study of a forgotten physics or a dusty relic of Hermetic lore. It is the reopening of a door that was never truly locked, only obscured by the heavy drapes of a strictly materialist perception. And how to command the ether, the lost science of instant manifestation, is an invitation to pull back those curtains and recognize that the vacuum of space is not an empty void, but a pressurized reservoir of infinite possibility, a shimmering loom upon which the tapestry of our physical reality is woven with every thought, every pulse of the heart, and every focused vibration of the soul. Imagine, if you will, a vast and silent sea of liquid light, so subtle that it passes through mountains as easily as it flows through the gaps between atoms. This is the ether, the primordial medium that serves as the connective tissue of the universe. For centuries, we have been taught to view ourselves as isolated islands in a cold and indifferent sea, disconnected from the objects we touch and the people we love. Yet, the lost science suggests a far more intimate arrangement. And we are not islands. We are whirlpools within that very sea, distinct in our motion, but composed entirely of the same water. To command the ether is to realize that the movement of the whirlpool can influence the currents of the entire ocean. It is the transition from being a passive observer of a fixed world to becoming a conscious participant in a fluid, responsive reality that mirrors the internal architecture of our own consciousness. The journey into this hidden dimension requires a shedding of the intellectual armor we have worn to protect ourselves from the perceived chaos of life. We often cling to the visible, the tangible, and the measurable as though they are the only truths, yet they are merely the foam atop the waves. Beneath the surface lies the deep, still pressure of the etheric field, where the blueprints of all things reside. But when we speak of instant manifestation, we are not discussing a magic trick or a suspension of natural law. Rather, we are describing the alignment with a higher octave of law that has been suppressed by the limitations of our collective belief. We have lived in a world of slow manifestation, where effort and time are the primary currencies, because we have forgotten how to communicate directly with the source code of existence. By rediscovering the language of the ether, we bypass the heavy machinery of the material plane and engage with the subtle sparks that precede the flame. This exploration is an evocative descent into the architecture of the miraculous. It suggests that the boundary between the within and the without is a porous membrane, a translucent veil that vibrates in resonance with our deepest intentions. When a master of this lost science looks at a stone, they do not see a solid, immutable object. They see a localized condensation of etheric energy, a slowed-down frequency held in place by a specific geometric signature. To change the stone or the circumstances of one's life, one does not hammer at the cold surface of the effect. Instead, one adjusts the frequency at the level of the cause. This is the art of command, a quiet, authoritative resonance that speaks to the field in its own tongue, requesting a reorganization of the light into a new form. We find ourselves in an era where the old structures of certainty are fracturing, and in those cracks, the light of the ether is once again beginning to leak through. We have spent an eternity trying to master the shadows on the cave wall, unaware that the fire behind us is our own inherent power. And the lost science of manifestation is the process of turning around, facing the fire, and finally understanding the mechanics of the projection. It is a terrifying and beautiful responsibility to realize that the universe is not happening to us. It is happening through us as a continuous dialogue between the silent witness of our awareness and the vibrant potential of the ether. This introduction serves as the first step across the threshold of that realization, a movement away from the frantic grasping of the ego and toward the sovereign poise of the Creator. As we peel back the layers of this ancient wisdom, we must be prepared to encounter a reality that is far more plastic and responsive than we were ever led to believe. The ether does not judge the quality of our commands. It simply reflects the intensity and clarity of our vibration. It is a neutral mirror of immense power, a celestial chalkboard waiting for a coherent script. If we find our lives cluttered with discord, it is often because our internal signals are a cacophony of conflicting desires and fears. To command the ether is to achieve a singular, crystalline focus, a state of being where the heart and the mind hum in a perfect, unified chord. In this state, the resistance of the physical world melts away, and the gap between thinking and being vanishes. The implications of this science are both practical and profoundly cosmic. On a practical level, it offers a way to navigate the complexities of human existence with a sense of agency and peace. On a cosmic level, it reconnects us to our heritage as children of the stars, made of the same luminous substance that forms the nebula and the suns. We are invited to remember a time when humanity walked in harmony with the invisible forces of nature, when the building of civilizations and the healing of the body were seen as extensions of a singular, sacred resonance. This is not a new invention, but a remembering of a sovereignty that is our birthright, a return to the center of the labyrinth where the minotaur of doubt is finally transmuted into the gold of certain knowledge. Consider the metaphor of a musical instrument. The ether is the air that carries the sound, and we are the players. If we strike the strings with violence and discord, the world returns a jarred and broken melody. But if we learn the subtle mathematics of the scales, if we understand how to tune our internal strings to the fundamental frequencies of the universe, the air responds by carrying a symphony of manifestation. Visa, the lost nature of this science, refers to the period of amnesia, where we forgot we were the musicians and began to believe we were merely the sound. Reclaiming the command of the ether is the process of picking up the instrument once more, feeling the weight of the wood and the tension of the strings, and daring to play a note that is pure, resonant, and entirely our own. In the sections that follow, we will dismantle the illusions of scarcity and separation that have kept the etheric field out of our conscious reach. We will explore the geometric heart of reality and the symbolic narratives that act as keys to these hidden chambers. This is a journey of reintegration, a mending of the broken link between the human spirit and the universal mind. By the time we reach the final transformation, the concept of instant manifestation will no longer seem like a distant dream, but like the most natural function of a soul that has finally recognized its own reflection in the infinite mirror of the ether. We are the architects of the unseen, the sculptors of the void, and the time has come to take up the chisel of our intention and begin the work of creation in earnest. To delve into the core themes of the etheric science is to begin an autopsy of the illusion of solidity. We inhabit a world that presents itself as a collection of hard edges, heavy weights, and immutable distances. Yet the first and most vital pillar of the lost science is the principle of universal fluidity. This concept suggests that what we perceive as matter is merely ether in a state of high-frequency agitation or specific geometric entrapment. Imagine a vast, invisible river flowing with unimaginable speed. Where the water hits a rock or enters an eddy, it creates a vortex. To a tiny observer within that stream, the vortex might look like a solid, permanent object, something distinct from the water itself. In truth, the vortex is nothing but the water in a specific state of motion. Though our bodies, our homes, and the very ground beneath our feet are these etheric vortices, stable patterns of interference in an infinite field of energy. Understanding this removes the first great barrier to manifestation, the belief that change requires the forceful manipulation of hard reality. When we recognize the underlying fluidity, we stop trying to move the rock and start influencing the current. This leads us to the second guiding pillar, the law of harmonic resonance, which acts as the steering mechanism for the etheric command. If the universe is a fluid field of vibration, then resonance is the language it speaks. In the material world, we are accustomed to the idea of pushing things to make them move, a linear application of force. In the etheric realm, however, movement is achieved through pulling or attracting via frequency matching. Qigong. When two strings on a piano are tuned to the same note, striking one will cause the other to vibrate without any physical contact. This is the mechanical secret of instant manifestation. The ether is a perfectly sensitive medium that responds to the note emitted by our consciousness. If our internal state, our deep, underlying frequency of being, matches the frequency of a desired outcome, the etheric field has no choice but to bridge the gap between the two. The instant nature of this manifestation is limited only by the clarity of our signal and our freedom from the dampening effects of doubt, which acts as a form of psychic friction, slowing the response of the field. The third theme we must navigate is the illusion of linear time, a construct that serves as the primary cage for the modern mind. We view manifestation as a process where a now moves toward a future goal through a series of steps. But the ether exists in a state of nunc stans, or the standing now. Within the field, every possibility already exists as a dormant geometric probability. To command the ether is to stop waiting for a future event and to instead collapse the wave function by inhabiting the frequency of the result in the present moment. From the perspective of the lost science, we do not get what we want, we receive what we are. The manifestation is not a journey across time, but a shift in perspective that brings a hidden layer of reality into sharp physical focus. This requires a radical reorientation of the will, and instead of wishing for a change, the practitioner of etheric command assumes the internal signature of the change already accomplished, effectively hooking the desired reality out of the sea of potential and anchoring it into the physical senses. Central to this process is the concept of the heart-mind coherence, a theme that bridges the gap between cold mechanics and lived experience. The mind is the architect, providing the geometric blueprint of the command, but the heart is the power station, providing the emotional charge that pressurizes the etheric field. A thought without feeling is like a radio tower with no electricity. The signal is technically correct, but it lacks the strength to reach its destination. Conversely, feeling without a clear thought is a surge of power with no direction, resulting in a chaotic and unpredictable life. The lost science teaches that the ether responds to the electromagnetic signature of the human being. The mind generates the electrical component through focus, while the heart generates the magnetic component through emotion. When these two are unified in a state of coherent appreciation or knowing, the resulting signal is a focused beam of etheric influence that can reorganize the surrounding reality with startling precision. We must also consider the theme of the Great Mirror, the understanding that the external world is not a separate entity, but a direct, high-fidelity reflection of our internal landscape. Many struggle with manifestation because they try to fix the reflection in the mirror without changing the face that looks into it. They see a world of scarcity or conflict and react with more fear and conflict, thereby commanding the ether to produce even more of the same. The lost science demands a sovereign detachment from appearances. To command the ether, one must be able to look at a lack and see plenty, to look at sickness and see wholeness. This is not delusion. It is the recognition that the current physical state is merely the echo of past vibrations. By refusing to react to the echo and instead projecting a new intentional sound, the practitioner initiates a new cycle of manifestation that must eventually supersede the old. The final core concept is that of geometric integrity. The ether is not a chaotic soup. It is organized according to profound mathematical and geometric laws, what some have called sacred geometry. Every form in nature, from the spiral of a galaxy to the structure of a snowflake, follows these etheric templates. To command the ether effectively, our intentions must possess a similar structural integrity. A vague or muddled desire lacks the sharpness to carve its image into the field. This is why the ancients utilized symbols, mandalas, and specific vocal resonances. These were tools designed to shape the human intention into a perfect etheric key. When our purpose is clear, ethical, and aligned with the broader patterns of universal growth, it gains the support of the field's inherent drive toward complexity and harmony. We are not working against the universe. We are learning to ride its most fundamental waves. By integrating these themes, fluidity, resonance, the collapse of time, coherence, the mirror, and geometry, we begin to see the outline of a new way of being. We are no longer victims of a random world, but operators of a sublime technology of consciousness. This lost science is essentially the science of the self, recognizing that our awareness is the primary substance from which all etheric commands originate. We are the lens through which the infinite light of the ether is focused into the particulars of human experience. As we master these concepts, the world begins to feel less like a prison of matter and more like a playground of light, waiting for us to remember the rules of the game we have been playing since the dawn of time. The command is not a shout into the dark. It is a clear, resonant song sung in a universe that is always, always listening. To understand the ether is to move beyond the cold mechanics of cause and effect and enter the realm of the living myth. For the universe often speaks most clearly when it clothes its laws in the garments of allegory. There is an ancient story, whispered in the shadow of the Great Pyramids and etched into the forgotten stones of the high Andes, of the great weaver who sat at the center of the world. This weaver did not use wool or silk, but rather the very fabric of the all, a shimmering, translucent thread that connected the heart of a star to the pulse of a sparrow. In this narrative, the weaver represents the etheric field, an infinite, intelligent tapestry that is constantly being embroidered by the needles of our attention. And the story goes that in the beginning, humanity knew how to guide the weaver's hand, singing songs that would cause the threads to pull together into the shapes of abundant harvests and peaceful cities. But as the ages turned, we became fascinated by the patterns themselves and forgot the weaver. We began to pull at the threads with our hands, trying to force the tapestry into new shapes through sheer physical strength. The result was a world of frayed edges and knotted destinies. The lost science is nothing less than the return to the weaver's side, learning once again to sing the songs of resonance that allow the fabric of reality to fold effortlessly into the forms we envision. Consider also the allegory of the alchemist's mirror, a tale that illustrates the perilous and profound nature of the etheric reflection. It is said there was once a seeker who discovered a mirror of such purity that it did not show the seeker's face, but rather the landscape of their most hidden thoughts. When the seeker looked into the mirror while feeling fear, the glass would darken, and the world behind them would fill with shadows and monsters. When the seeker looked with love, the mirror would bloom with light, and the barren desert around them would transform into a garden of lilies. The seeker spent years trying to polish the glass, thinking the monsters were a defect in the mirror itself, until they realized that the mirror was merely a perfect servant. The ether is this alchemist's mirror. It does not argue with the image we present to it. It lacks the capacity for judgment or correction. If we stand before the ether claiming we are unworthy or lacking, the etheric field, in its infinite fidelity, must rearrange the geometry of our lives to prove us right. The command of the ether is therefore not a command given to an external deity or a blind force, but a command of one's own internal image. To manifest instantly is to have the courage to stand before the mirror and see the garden even when the desert winds are still blowing against your skin. In the traditions of the Far East, there is a metaphor of the Indra's net, a cosmic web that stretches infinitely in all directions. At every vertex of the net hangs a single, multifaceted jewel, and because of the polished surface of these gems, every jewel reflects all the others. Yet if you touch one thread of the net, the entire web vibrates. If you change the color of one jewel, the reflection in every other jewel shifts in response. This symbolic narrative serves as the foundation for understanding the instant in instant manifestation. In the etheric net, there is no such thing as a localized event. Because the ether is a non-local field, meaning it is not bound by the speed of light or the constraints of physical distance, a shift in the jewel of your own consciousness is immediately felt at the furthest reaches of the web. We often believe we are waiting for the universe to catch up to our desires, but the narrative of the net suggests that the universe has already shifted the moment our internal jewel changed its hue. And the delay we experience is merely the time it takes for our physical senses to acknowledge the vibration that has already permeated the ether. Perhaps the most evocative narrative is that of the silent architect and the echoing hall. Imagine a grand cathedral of infinite dimensions, where every whisper is amplified 1,000-fold and returned to the speaker as a thunderous chorus. Most people walk through this hall complaining about the noise, shouting for silence, and thereby creating a never-ending cycle of cacophony. They are the unconscious architects of their own discord. The master of the ether, however, understands the nature of the hall. They enter in total silence, waiting until the echoes of their past have died away. In that stillness, they speak a single, perfect word, a word of health, of abundance, or of creative fire. And they do not need to shout, for they know the hall will do the work of amplification. This story reminds us that the ether is a pressurizer of intention. It takes the seed of a focused thought and expands it into a forest of experience. The lost science is not about working harder to create. It is about becoming more silent, more precise, and more deliberate in the words we choose to speak into the echoing hall of existence. We find another layer of meaning in the myth of the celestial labyrinth. In this story, the seeker is lost in a maze of stone walls that seem to shift and change, leading them in circles. For years, the seeker maps the walls, studies the floor, and tries to calculate the exit. Eventually, the seeker tires and looks up, realizing for the first time that the labyrinth has no ceiling. Above them is the open sky and the light of the sun. By simply changing their orientation from horizontal, the material plane, to vertical, the etheric plane, the seeker realizes that the walls are an illusion maintained only by their focus on the ground. To command the ether is to look up from the perceived limitations of the physical maze. It is the realization that we are not trapped by the walls of our bank accounts, our past mistakes, or our social standing, unless we choose to remain in the horizontal perspective. The etheric field is the open sky of the mind, where the paths are not dictated by stone, but by the direction of our gaze. These symbolic narratives, the weaver, the mirror, the net, the hall, and the labyrinth, are not mere bedtime stories. They are technical manuals disguised as poetry. They teach us that the ether is responsive, reflective, interconnected, amplifying, and liberating. They move us away from the ego's desire to conquer nature and toward the soul's desire to dance with it. When we view manifestation through these symbols, the pressure to perform a miracle vanishes, replaced by a sense of sacred play. We realize that we have always been commanding the ether. We have simply been doing it with a divided heart and a clouded eye. By adopting these narratives, we begin to see the world as a living, breathing partner in our evolution, a shimmering field of potential that is as eager to be shaped as we are to shape it. The stories remind us that the power we seek is not a weapon to be wielded, but a harmony to be realized, a return to the primordial state where the word and the world were one and the same. To transition from the ethereal heights of cosmic symbolism to the grounded reality of the everyday is the ultimate test of the etheric practitioner. The lost science is not a retreat from the world, but a more profound engagement with it, providing a methodology to navigate the mundane with the poise of a sovereign creator. The first step in practical integration is the cultivation of what we might call etheric hygiene. Just as we wash our hands to remove physical grit, we must learn to cleanse our internal environment of the static produced by collective anxiety, media saturation, and the recursive loops of small talk and surface-level concerns. This involves a deliberate withdrawal of attention from the chaotic noise of the material plane. By reclaiming our attention, we preserve the charge of our etheric field. In a practical sense, this means becoming a gatekeeper of your own consciousness, choosing to engage only with those frequencies that align with the reality you wish to manifest. When you refuse to feed a narrative of lack or drama with your focus, you effectively starve that reality of the etheric energy it needs to sustain its physical form. The real-world implication of this hygiene is a noticeable shift in the luck or synchronicity one experiences. As the internal signal becomes clearer, the etheric field begins to reorganize the external environment to match this newfound coherence. You may find that the right person calls at exactly the right moment, or that a solution to a long-standing problem appears with effortless grace. These are not accidents. They are the mechanical results of a reduced noise-to-signal ratio. And to integrate this, one must practice the art of radical appreciation. Appreciation is the practical application of harmonic resonance. By finding and focusing on the existing notes of harmony in your life, no matter how small, you provide the ether with a template for expansion. If you appreciate the warmth of a cup of coffee with the same intensity that you would appreciate a grand success, the etheric field does not distinguish between the two. It simply responds to the frequency of abundance and begins to amplify it across all sectors of your experience. Another vital practice is the use of embodied assumption. Since the ether is nonlinear and responds to the now, the most effective way to command it is to behave as though the manifestation is already a historical fact. This is not about faking it until you make it, which implies a gap between reality and pretense. No, rather, it is about collapsing the timeline by inhabiting the emotional and physical state of the desired outcome. If you are seeking health, you walk, breathe, and speak with the rhythm of wholeness. If you are seeking creative mastery, you approach your work with the quiet confidence of one who has already succeeded. This consistent wearing of the frequency acts as a constant pressure on the etheric field, forcing the slow-moving matter of the physical world to eventually crystallize around the persistent mold of your being. This practice transforms every mundane action, from walking down the street to answering an email, into a ritual of manifestation. We must also address the practical handling of resistance. In the material world, we are taught that if we hit a wall, we should push harder. In etheric science, resistance is seen as a sign of disharmony, a literal clashing of frequencies. When you encounter a delay or an obstacle, the practical response is not increased effort, but increased internal stillness. By stepping back and smoothing out your own vibration, you allow the etheric field to find a path of least resistance. Often, the walls in our lives are held in place by our own defensive posture. When we drop the internal defense and return to a state of fluid potential, the wall often dissolves of its own accord, or reveals a hidden doorway that was previously invisible to the stressed and narrow mind. This shift from force to flow is perhaps the most life-changing implication of the lost science, as it replaces the exhaustion of the striver with the inexhaustible energy of the conduit. In the realm of relationships and social interaction, the command of the ether manifests as a profound radiance. Because we are all nodes in the same etheric net, your internal state acts as a silent broadcast that others pick up on a subconscious level. By maintaining a high-frequency state of peace and self-sovereignty, you naturally pull others into that same resonance. Conflict begins to melt away, not because you have won an argument, but because you have moved the entire interaction onto a frequency where conflict cannot exist. This has massive implications for leadership, healing, and community building. A single individual who has mastered their etheric command can stabilize a room of chaotic vibrations simply by the strength and clarity of their own field. A practical integration, therefore, involves recognizing that your primary contribution to any situation is not what you do, but the frequency you hold. Finally, we must integrate the concept of the geometric signature into our daily habits. Our environments, the rooms we live in, the objects we surround ourselves with, and even the geometry of our posture act as etheric resonators. A cluttered, chaotic environment creates a cluttered, chaotic etheric signal. Practical etheric command involves intentionally structuring your physical space to reflect the order and beauty of the cosmic field. This is the science behind the ancient arts of space arrangement. By creating anchors of beauty and intention in your physical world, you create a feedback loop that helps maintain your internal frequency. Every time your eye falls upon an object that represents your highest intention, your etheric field is reinforced. In this way, the physical world becomes a laboratory where you refine your command, turning the mundane task of tidying a desk or arranging a room into a high-level manipulation of universal energy. As these practices take root, the boundary between working and manifesting begins to blur. You realize that your entire life is a continuous etheric command, and the responsibility of that realization brings with it a deep, abiding peace. You no longer need to chase the world. You simply need to remain at the center of your own resonance, watching as the etheric tides bring everything you require to your shores. The real-world implication is a life lived with a sense of magic that is actually deeply scientific, a seamless dance between the seen and the unseen, where every moment is an opportunity to rewrite the script of reality through the quiet authority of a focused soul. We have traveled from the shimmering liquid horizons of the primordial ether to the intimate chambers of the human heart, tracing the golden thread of a science that was never truly lost, but merely waiting for a consciousness vast enough to reclaim it. To command the ether is to finally accept the heavy and beautiful crown of your own divinity, recognizing that the miraculous is simply the natural behavior of a universe that has been met with its own reflection. We have seen that the void is not empty, that time is not a prison, and that the boundaries between your skin and the stars are nothing more than a convenient fiction maintained by a limited perspective. Idolna, the journey of instant manifestation, is not a quest for power over others or a greedy grasping at the treasures of the earth. It is a profound homecoming, a return to the realization that you are the weaver, the mirror, and the song all at once. The transformation we speak of is not a change in what you have, but a radical shift in what you are. As you stand at the conclusion of this exploration, you are invited to look upon the world with new eyes, eyes that see through the mask of solidity to the dancing light beneath. The old world of struggle, where you were a small, fragile creature buffeted by the winds of fate, is dissolving. In its place, a new reality is crystallizing, one where you stand as a sovereign architect of resonance. The etheric field is even now pressing against you, waiting for a clear signal, a coherent thought, and a heart filled with the quiet certainty of the already accomplished. It is a field of infinite patience and infinite power, a celestial womb that is ready to birth whatever version of yourself you are brave enough to embody. This is your transformational call, to stop being a seeker and to start being a source. For too long, humanity has walked the earth as beggars, asking the universe for permission, for health, and for abundance. The lost science of the ether reminds us that we are not the beggars at the gate. We are the life force that sustains the gate itself. To command the ether, you must dare to speak to the cosmos as an equal, with the humble authority of a child who knows they are loved and an adept who knows the laws. This requires a shedding of the stories of unworthiness and the addiction to the process of becoming. The ether does not understand becoming. It only understands being. If you wish to manifest a life of brilliance, you must be brilliant now. If you wish to live in a world of peace, you must be the peace that passes all understanding this very second. As you step away from these words and back into the flow of your daily life, remember that you are carrying a hidden technology in every pulse of your blood. Every thought you think is a ripple in the etheric sea. Every emotion you feel is a magnetic pull on the fabric of reality. You are never not manifesting. The choice is no longer whether to create, but whether to create consciously or by default. Let your life become a living prayer of resonance. Let your actions be the geometric anchors of your highest ideals. When you walk, feel the ether giving way before you, moving to accommodate the weight of your intention. When you speak, hear the echoes of your words expanding into the infinite. organizing the atoms of tomorrow into the structures of your choosing. The path of the etheric commander is one of silence, poise, and immense gratitude. It is a path that leads away from the frantic noise of the ego and into the deep, pressurized stillness of the soul. In that stillness, the gap between the thought and the thing vanishes. You realize that the ether is not something you use, it is something you participate in, a sacred dialogue that has no end. The lost science is found the moment you realize it was never missing, for it is written in the very geometry of your breath and the light of your awareness. And go forth and command the light, not as a master of a slave, but as a lover of a beloved, and watch as the universe rises to meet you with a magnificence that your current mind can barely imagine. The loom is ready, the threads are shimmering, and the weaver is waiting for your first true song.